Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Mike McIntyre. I'm the host of the Sound of Ideas on 90.3 WCPN Idea Stream, and I'm a columnist for the Plain Dealer. Very pleased to be here to moderate our conversation about issues 2 and 3 on the November ballot. Issue 3 deals with the legalization and distribution of marijuana for personal and medicinal use in Ohio. Issue 2 is related to that, and I'll explain. Let's start with issue 3. The Ohio Marijuana Legalization Initiative would legalize the medical and personal use of marijuana for people who are 21 years of age or older, and it would establish a fixed number of marijuana growing and retail operations. It was put on the ballot through an effort funded by an organization called ResponsibleOhio, and we'll hear more about them this hour. Issue 2 is the Ohio Initiated Monopolies Amendment. Issue 2 would prohibit monopolies, oligopolies, and cartels from being written into the Ohio Constitution. This issue found its way to the ballot through the efforts of Ohio's legislature acting in response to the Marijuana Legislation Initiative, the Marijuana Legalization Initiative. Proponents believe issue 3 will provide additional options for individuals with chronic disease, provide money to local communities, and establish a new industry with potential for much economic development. Critics argue that marijuana legalization can be bad for society, could lead to more drug use, and would present big problems for businesses. And they say its creation of 10 grow sites promised to financial backers constitutes an unfair oligopoly. Issue 2 backers say the state constitution should not be used in this way. And critics of issue 2 wonder where these folks were when casino gambling, with defined sites and operators, was written into the Constitution. Let me introduce our panelists. They're going to start by giving us a thought, each of them will, and then I'm going to ask them some questions throughout the early part of this program. Then it's your chance to ask questions in the second part. We'll start with Bill Denihan, directly to my left. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Services Board of Cuyahoga County, and a member of Ohioans Against Marijuana Monopolies. Good to have you here, Bill.
Thank you very much.
Also here is Ian James. He's the Executive Director of the organization I mentioned earlier, ResponsibleOhio. Good to have you here too, Ian. And as you can imagine, both of them have strong points of view on these ballot issues. Let me tell you a word about, and I'm sure many of you do too, so a word about our format. It's not a formal timed debate. It's a conversation with these advocates on either side of the issues. All of you will have a chance to ask your questions in the second half, and as Dan Moulthrop mentioned earlier today, let's make sure they're questions. I know it's a City Club crowd, so they're going to be concise, insightful, substantive, and they will actually be questions. And that's what we're going to do a little bit later. And with that, let's get started. And we talked earlier about who might start, and it's going to be Bill and then Ian. For just a couple of minutes, tell us where you stand on this issue.
Well, thank you for inviting us here today. I'm glad to be here to see a lot of friends, our board members, and new friends and folks from all specters of our great community of Cuyahoga County. I'm the CEO of the Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Board, which is composed of 18 individuals from various parts of our community that represent mental illness and addiction issues. The board has decided that to oppose the legalization to promote, grow, sell, manage marijuana for recreational and or medical purposes. This decision is congruent with the board's position to prevent mental illness and to provide services for those that are addicted and have mental illnesses. The board believes that the marijuana would be harmful, which is consistent with many other medical organizations in our community. And the studies have clearly outlined the harmful effects that marijuana has, increasing the risk of psychiatric disease by 5 times, and that adolescents are especially vulnerable to many of its adverse effects. In addition to the physical effects, the board believes that it would have ramifications on society, including worsening a current problem for employers that are finding their employees failing drug tests and failing drug tests to get it for employment, and the issue of decreased adolescent perceptions that marijuana is harmful, has harmful effects, and a potential increase of individuals developing addictions to marijuana and other drugs. Concerning medical marijuana, the board feels strongly that it should be subject to the same research, consideration, studies as any other medicine or drug by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Thank you for allowing me to be here.
Thank you, Bill Denihan. Ian?
Thank you. Thanks for City Club for having us here today. Thanks for my friend Bill Denihan to be a part of this. We may not agree, but we are friends. I look at what's happened since 1997, and I see that the State House has literally refused to reform marijuana laws, and that's really failed or fueled a failed marijuana prohibition that's wasted $120 million a year. And that's left countless chronically ill patients to needlessly suffer, and it's ruined the lives of many with harsh and unjust generational penalties. That's just a fact. Issue 3 ensures access to health care and at a price that all patients can afford. It ends an unjust system that shackles people to a past in which they are unable to realize the promise of a better tomorrow. And it smothers the cartel's drug market that creates no legitimate jobs and pays no taxes. My friend Bill has laid out his objection and the board's objection to legalization. Folks, people are consuming marijuana today. They're buying marijuana not far from that door today. You're paying for failure of our system every day. And it's not getting any better. Suggesting that we need to sustain this failure of prohibition and that in doing so we'll be safer, kids will be safer, our families will be safer, our communities will be safer, is like saying that we're safer with moonshiners and gangsters than we are with liquor stores and convenience stores. Think about that. Because what Bill's outlined is essentially the argument that they used in prohibition of alcohol. Sustain this failure, it'll get better, we're going to be better off for it, and you know what? We're going to be safer. You cannot be safer when you do not regulate and when you cannot control that which you do not regulate. So I think this is going to be a wonderful conversation today, but I wanted to put that on the table so we could have this more further discussion.
Let me throw a first question at you, because you brought up the point about law enforcement and about the idea of marijuana being illegal. But in Ohio, marijuana has been decriminalized for a long time. You can possess up to, I think it's 3.5 ounces, 100 grams. I'm not really good with the metrics, but something like that. And you can essentially be given a misdemeanor ticket. So how does that argument sit with the fact that it isn't as highly criminal as perhaps some people might be painting it to be?
Sure, well, it's this great hoax that we perpetrate on our citizens, saying that this is decriminalized as if it's legal. You know, it's not legal to consume marijuana. If you are walking down the street, if you are 21 years of age and you're walking down the street and you have a single joint in your pocket and you get pulled over by an officer and they find a single joint in your pocket, it doesn't seem like it's a big deal until you go to court. And once you go to court, you pay a $150 fine and you lose your driver's license. You were a pedestrian, but you lose your driver's license. Or if you're going to college, you lose your student financial aid. Or if you are working in the state of Ohio and you have to have an employment license or permit to work, think plumber, realtor, nail technician, barber, you lose that ability to work. We're not making the state safer from one person having a joint in their pocket. We're making it harder for that person to live. And if that person has to live with public housing, they lose public housing, and so you're separating families. So this cruel hoax of decriminalization being okay, it's not okay, because it has generational penalties that are harmful, not just today, but as I said, generationally, they are very, very harmful on families.
Bill Denihan, your response to that?
Well, here's a couple of facts that we know of. That in our prison, 1/10 of 1% are there for marijuana. 10 years ago, what Ian explained might have been true in our county.
It's true today.
And today, Cuyahoga County has reduced the number of people going to prison in half. We had 25%, we're now down to 13%. That is extraordinary, and part of that is treatment versus incarceration. So people are given the opportunity to receive treatment or be incarcerated through our mental health courts and our drug courts. And that is happening today. The number of folks that are losing jobs are those that are on the job, failed a drug test, and have experience or a job that's moving equipment or moving people. And those that are failing the drug test to get a job are extraordinary. There is a community in southern Ohio which 80% of the applicants failed the drug test. So that is a problem, and that is a problem that we have in terms of law enforcement. Law enforcement is not supportive of this amendment. When you talk to law enforcement, they will tell you, we are not supportive of this amendment, and they have come out opposed to this amendment.
Ian, most of the other states, all the other states that have legalized recreational marijuana first had medicinal marijuana, and it was in some ways a test of how it would work, and then moved on to the broader legalization. You guys have done what others have failed to do in the past and get it before the voters. Why go for the whole shebang instead of going for medical first?
Because what these other states have actually learned through their experience, 23 states have legalized medical marijuana, 4 have legalized the personal use after they've had medical marijuana. And what they've learned is that in going to the medical marijuana component, while they do address the compassionate care that medical marijuana provides the chronically ill, they seem to discard reality. The reality is that people consume marijuana every day. And if you're not providing those folks that are consuming marijuana and buying it illegally a way to do so in a regulated fashion, they're going to gravitate towards the legal but medical component. In doing that, you're actually having folks lie, game the system, get marijuana at a lower price, pay lower taxes on it, but they're gaming the system ultimately. And it seems that that's not a good recipe for moving forward. If we just do medical marijuana and only do that, you are still going to have hundreds of thousands of people consuming marijuana illegally in Ohio. And that doesn't seem like a good idea if you're going to really want to regulate this system. With one thing that Bill said here, I never said people go to prison, Bill. What I was talking about was people that actually, there are about 17,000 people every year that get a misdemeanor. They have a minor marijuana infraction. So discounting that or not addressing that is turning a blind eye to reality. Folks are actually impacted on this every single day. In fact, in Ohio, this is one of the reasons the Ohio ACLU supports Yes on 3, is because there is a dramatic impact on people across the state with these minor marijuana infractions. Not everybody goes to prison, but thousands of them lose their driver's license, thousands of them lose their ability to go to college, thousands of them lose their jobs, not because they're high at work, but because they have a joint in their pocket and they get busted for it. Now, that's a minor marijuana infraction. It's not a felony.
Bill, I wanted you to address the medical marijuana, and then if you wanted to respond to Ian, that'd be great too. But what about the idea of if there was a ballot measure that said medical marijuana ought to be instituted in Ohio, like 23 other states? Would you be in favor of that?
No, I wouldn't. The reality is that the medical field has been working on this issue for a long time, and they're looking at a component called cannabidiol that would help individuals that have seizure disorders. It was part of the marijuana plant, which the growers are not using because it doesn't cause a mood enhancement. It could be effective on the seizures, and it's actually in the third phase of the approval by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. So there is work being done on it, and actually our family went through a crisis on that a few years ago, and having this discussion we're having today. And after talking to several doctors, and the reality that going through it, that we made it through with the current medicine and drugs that we had then, and it's improving every day. It's a sensitive issue. And I believe that if they need legislation for that, then it should be with the approval and the sanction and the study of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, and it's not.
Ian, you guys are really hammering that hard. I saw a commercial on TV last night with the 9-year-old girl whose mother would like to move back to Ohio, but they can't because marijuana is not legal. So clearly you think that's a point voters will pay attention to.
She's 4, and her name is Addison Benton, and Addison had 1,000 epileptic seizures a day. She lived outside of the city of Cincinnati, but because of her zip code, she was prohibited from having the medicine that helps her alleviate her from seizures. They moved to Colorado, and they put a transdermal patch on her ankle every day, and she's gone from 1,000 epileptic seizures to 3, and sometimes 2. So it's not a miracle. It's literally, it's science. It does work. You know, there are doctors such as Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who's a neurosurgeon and a CNN contributor, who was adamantly opposed to medical marijuana, and he fought vociferously to stop any sort of medical marijuana for years. He ultimately came to the conclusion, that it does work. It does work. It helps people not just with epilepsy, people with cancer, people with Alzheimer's, people with Parkinson's disease, our veterans that come back with PTSD. And of course, yes, it does help with folks with epilepsy and sickle cell anemia. The issue that Bill raises is, let's just wait and see what happens and let's let the legislature do it. Folks, the legislature has spent 18 plus years doing nothing. I get the rap of I'm getting paid to work on this campaign. Well, guess what? I'm getting paid because the people that you're paying to fix this issue that 80% plus of Ohio voters want to be resolved, medical marijuana, and almost 6 out of 10 want, and that's the adult personal use of marijuana, they want them to solve that, and they're not doing it. And they're not going to do it until you ask them through your vote to do so. You can wait for the FDA to move forward, but let's also face facts. There's a medicine out now that has marijuana in it. It's Marinol. It costs $1,200 a month for people to get this pill. There are folks that cannot afford that. This amendment sets up a system that allows those medical marijuana patients to get the medicine they need. They have access to it at the price that any patient can afford. We did that so that everybody has access to health care, not just the folks that have the money.
You mentioned the legislature. Not only are members of our legislature, many of the members of the legislature, against Issue 3. They don't want to see marijuana legalized. They also have put forward Issue 2, which would be a rewrite, a new constitutional amendment that says you can't use the Constitution in this way to create what they call monopolies or oligopolies or cartels from being created. Bill, you would tell people to vote no on Issue 3. Would you tell them to vote yes on Issue 2? And if so, why? How does that help?
Well, that would, that would be in compliance with the thought of the General Assembly to have a vote of yes on Issue 2 to prevent Issue 3 should Issue 3 pass.
There's discussion that it's broader than Issue 3, that it's protection of the Constitution.
It is.
Do you believe that?
Well, I believe what they wrote, and what they wrote is in response to this Issue 3 legislation. And they used the Constitution to support a very small group of people. And the Constitution is written to protect individuals, not support special groups. The other part is that, and I wanted to get back to the impact of marijuana. The state of Colorado will finally have figures. State of Colorado, DUIs have doubled in Colorado since the approval of the marijuana. School expulsions has increased, and the marijuana-related hospitalization is up 38%. Those are significant figures. That's the reality, and that's what's happening today. People are dying as a result of individuals who have used marijuana. There was a woman in Oberlin in this area, under the influence of marijuana, drove a car into a house, killed a woman, and injured a child, and she was charged with marijuana DUI. That's part of the impact that we're concerned about. And
Ian, before I get you to respond to the Colorado things, I'd like to ask your thoughts about how should voters understand the link between issue 2 and 3?
Sure. Well, this comes from the state politicians who have failed to do anything on marijuana reform. They've abdicated their responsibility to the voters to address this issue, and now they've put forth what I call, they call it issue 2. I call it the Drug Dealer Protection Act. That's not certainly what they intended for it to do, but that's what it does, because they're literally trying to stop you from having your say on marijuana reform. Ultimately, what they did in their rush, I was at the State House following this very closely, and what they did in the last day of voting was they had 18 different versions of this House Joint Resolution. I don't think they even saw the pun in that, but you probably just picked that up. They had 18 different versions. In their last version, in the infinite wisdom of the legislature, they screwed up. They made it so that it doesn't even affect issue 3. They literally were trying so desperately to try to stop issue 3 while telling people this had nothing to do with marijuana legalization, folks. But it had everything to do with it, only because they didn't want to deal with it. They didn't want you to deal with it. So we're seeing that issue is going down. It's on a slow descent to failure. And that's because voters really don't like it when the State House says, hey, you know what, we want you to give up your rights to put issues before the voters. We want you to not be able to exercise those rights. As far as what Bill's talking about with people driving while under the influence, folks, again, marijuana isn't legalized, and you're not regulating this system. You're failing at regulating this system. We are spending $120 million a year to sustain this failure. So, I think Bill was probably going to get to the point that is the correct point, which is marijuana is more potent than it ever has been before. And if Bill doesn't say that yet, he will in a second, because I just teed it up for him. And here's the reality of it. You know what? It is. It is more powerful than ever before, but isn't that a reason to regulate what's out there? Again, you cannot control that which you don't regulate, and suggesting that we don't regulate it and everything's going to be hunky-dory and, we can deal with these problems. We're not dealing with it. You're paying for it. And Bill's not providing the solutions to it, and neither is the legislature. That's not Bill's fault, mind you. That's the legislative leader's ineptitude.
Let's ask Bill that question.
Well, I think the legislature has, in my viewpoint, put forth an amendment that would deal with the potential of passing issue 3, and I commend them for doing that. One thing you don't want to see is legislative made. But it's made, and they took a position, and I am glad they took that position, in case, God forbid, issue 3 passes. Putting that aside, we're also concerned about the clinical risk. I mean, it's 5 times. Smoking a joint is 5 times more damaging than a cigarette. There are 483 more chemicals in one pot. 5 to 6 times more tires that offend a person in terms of cancer.
And what about the potency as well?
Well, the potency, we know from the studies that had that about 9% of adults will be addicted, and about 17% of children. And the increase in children is the perception that it's not harmful, and they get that perception from some of the discussions that are had by other states, as Ian pointed out. So the perception of kids is, well, I could do it. It's a rite of passage. Why not? Why not try it? And the problem is it becomes deadly. I meet regularly with addicted heroin addicts, and they tell me they either start from the hospital or start 10 or 11 years old with marijuana, and that they stay with marijuana because it helps them through their addiction. And they unequivocally say, don't vote for it. They want to maintain their recovery. Putting marijuana out there is not going to help.
We have a number of young people here, and welcome. I'm glad you guys are here, and I know you're going to be asking questions in the second half of this. Many studies, Ian, show that young people's brains are much more susceptible and much more damaged by the effects of marijuana. the law that you're putting forward would make it illegal under the age of 21. But what about Bill's point that it essentially legitimizes it?
Well, it legalizes it, and the fact is that Bill is suggesting. Look, let me just back up for a second. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I haven't had a drink for about 23 years. Okay, I have a fully stocked bar at my house and my home and my office. Not because I'm ever going to have a drink ever again, but because I want my friends and families who do consume alcohol to be able to enjoy a drink. Now, that's because the addiction is my problem, not your problem. And what Bill is suggesting is that because some people have an addiction to some other substance that is not related to marijuana except for a phantom gateway, that it does not exist, it's been proven to not exist. It's like saying that I'm addicted to alcohol because of my mother's milk. Folks, that's not real. And marijuana some folks may have tried marijuana and gone on to other drugs, but the addiction is in that person. It's not in society, and it's not that all of a sudden some switch gets flipped and it's, okay, now I've gone from marijuana, I want to start shooting up, or I want to snort heroin, or I want to go to cocaine. That just is not real. It has been proven time and again to not be real. One of the great hoaxes that we have from the war on drugs is this gateway effect. It's baloney.
What about, though, the idea that there's a legitimacy for young people who see older people legally using marijuana in the same way that they might model drinking behavior? Is there any fear that because marijuana is legal for those over 21 that younger people would be more inclined to want to try it either when they're 21 or younger?
Actually, you've seen teenage use go down in Colorado, not go up. And when you regulate marijuana and the consumption, the purchasing of it, it's the same issue as before. If someone's going to buy marijuana at a store, they've got to show an ID. Today, let me tell you what, maybe a secret, but drug dealers don't card kids. They don't. It's a cash and carry business.
So he asked me, so I'll answer.
I asked you both, but yes,
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your answer too.
Our kids emulate us. They do what we do, and they're really good at it. And for them to see somebody doing this, they're going to think, well, it's okay for me to do it. And it happens. It's a reality. Again, the expulsions in Colorado for school kids is increased significantly. And the number of visits to the hospital that is marijuana related has gone up 38%, while DUIs and the deaths attributed to marijuana has doubled. Those are significant figures that tell us that that's harmful and it's not working the way it should work, or the way you want it to work, and the way you're proposing it to work.
Let's pause for a moment and hear from Dan Moulthrop, president of the City Club, CEO of the City Club, king of the City Club. I think it's essentially the title.
King for a day. Hello, I am Dan Moulthrop, Chief Executive here at the City Club, and today we're enjoying a panel conversation on the Marijuana Legalization Initiative and the Ohio-initiated Monopolies Amendment, also known as Issues 3 and 2, respectively. Our panel features Ian James, Executive Director of ResponsibleOhio, and Bill Denihan, CEO of the Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Services Board of Cuyahoga County, and also a member of Ohioans Against Marijuana Monopolies. Our moderator is WCPN Sound of Ideas host and plain dealer columnist Michael McIntyre. We encourage all of you to formulate your questions for our panel now and remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point. If you're joining us via our webcast, you're invited to tweet a question at the City Club. We welcome all of you here and those joining us via the webcast, which is provided by our primary media partner, 90.3 WCPN, WVIZ PBS, 104.9 WCLV Idea Stream. We also welcome any of those joining us via the podcast or on any of the radio stations across the region and country that carry City Club programs. Production and distribution of City Club forums are made possible by Cleveland State University and PNC. Be sure to join us on Monday, October 19th, for a panel conversation on Issue 1, the Ohio Bipartisan Redistricting Commission Amendment, with Republican Senator Frank LaRose of Ohio Senate District 27 and Democratic Representative Michael Curtin of Ohio House District 17. For more information about that program or any of our upcoming or past forums, please visit us online at cityclub.org. Today's forum is sponsored by the Northeast Ohio Media Group, the City Club's sponsor of all politics and policy programming. We thank you very much for your support. And today we welcome guests at tables hosted by the Greater Cleveland Partnership, Responsible Ohio, and the ADAMHS Board of Cuyahoga County. We thank you all for joining us. Also, we welcome students to today's forum from Cleveland School of the Arts, Gilmore Academy, and Shaw High School. Thank you very much for joining us, students. Student participation is made possible by a generous grant from the Loeb Foundation. Will the students please stand to be recognized? Now it's time to return to the panel for our traditional City Club Q&A. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests. Holding our microphones today are Content Associate Teddy Eisenberg and Marketing and Outreach Fellow Faye Walker. Our first question, please.
Good afternoon. I am glad that Dan mentioned that today is the deadline for voter registration. And I always spend a lot of time trying to register 18-year-olds to vote, or those who will be 18 by November 3rd. And I also spend time registering ex-offenders who have been incarcerated. The 18-year-olds were really excited about Issue 3 for whatever reason, and the ex-offenders were excited because so many of them had served time because of marijuana. My question is to Ian, did you do any targeted voter registration in this campaign as one of your strategies?
Ian?
It's a great question. Yes, we actually worked with, when we were collecting signatures, we collected about almost 800,000 signatures from Ohioans to get the issue on the ballot. There was a lot of consternation in working through that process. As you may know, and I think I'm in a federal lawsuit against the Secretary of State right now. In fact, I am. We also
Was over the wording, or?
No, it's because he's being a tyrant. But other than that, he's trying to suppress people's rights to freely associate and assemble, and that's why I think I've actually called him Vladimir Husted, and I would do so again. I just did.
Yeah, I think you just did.
Yeah, and then we've actually worked on the Fresh Start Act, which I think goes directly to the folks that you're speaking of. The Fresh Start Act, we collected 236,000 signatures, and we've registered about 150,000 Ohioans. At the same time that Ohio, just kind of wrap your head around this, the same time, I just saw a report this morning, Ohio has purged about 800,000 voters from the voter rolls this year. 800,000. And we've registered another 150,000, and with the Fresh Start Act, we've actually been working to make sure that folks that have been incarcerated or have had an offense for something that's no longer illegal have the ability to expunge their record or have sentencing review. Now, that's important because of all the things, not just the folks that Bill's talking about that have gone to the pen, but the folks who have had that misdemeanor. I mean, you're talking about thousands and thousands of Ohioans every year. We estimate that 50,000 people immediately would be able to expunge their records and move forward. That unshackles them from their past. But one of the big ways that you can unshackle yourself is through voter registration and to actually be participatory in the democracy.
Let me ask Bill to respond to that too from your side, from the opposition side. Is there a concerted effort for registering voters and for getting the vote out on this issue?
Yes, we've always taken a position of getting registered voters, especially for those that have a difficulty speaking for themselves, the mentally ill in our community and those that have addictions. We especially get them engaged and involved. And the other thing is it is important for the expungement of records, especially for those during the previous 10 or 20 years where we were very effective arresting a person for using, not dealing, first-time offense, and nonviolent. It made them felons. And fortunately, we have turned that around and done treatment versus incarceration. And it is working in terms of decriminalizing this whole process. So we believe it's important and we support it.
Another question, this time from this side of the room. Sir?
Yes, I wanted to ask both parties. Do you find that ethnic groups and or immigrants are particularly vulnerable in drug usage? And in Ian's case, the penalties, which you say are taking them down for using, say, one joint.
Bill?
Well, we have had experience with the replacement refugees, and the challenge they have is interpretation. And many times they get engaged in very difficult issues with understanding the laws and interpretation. So the more we could do in that area, the better off we are in providing those services. And Cleveland is one of the hot spots in the country that takes in a lot of refugees and immigrants.
Ian, anything specific about ethnic groups or
I'm
immigrants?
not certain that I've seen any studies on that. I do know that if you look at it racially, the breakup, even though blacks and whites consume marijuana at approximately the same amount, across the state of Ohio, according to the ACLU, you're 4 times more likely if you're black to be arrested, not just ticketed, arrested for marijuana consumption than white folks. In Cuyahoga County, that's 6 to 1. In Columbiana and Allen County, if you have the misfortune of living there and you're black, you're 13 times more likely than white folks to be arrested. So I don't know about the issue of consumption, but I know that the impact racially on how we address marijuana and enforcement of this failed prohibition is disproportionately on communities of color.
Oh, wait, but you said, okay, but is that for having...
So you're not on the mic.
Sorry.
So let's try to get that. I'd like to get that follow-up question. Or not. Just speak loudly, please, and we'll get that follow-up.
I'm sorry, but is that for having a large quantity of marijuana or just having a small amount? You're saying that they would arrest a person of color.
Yeah,
The question was whether it was because of a large quantity or a small
Yeah.
amount that a person of color
Sure.
would be more likely to be
Yeah,
arrested.
if here's a harsh reality, folks. If you're black and you're driving through a white suburb and you happen to be in a car and you're smoking a joint, there's a good chance you're going to go downtown to jail. That happens, and it happens here in Cleveland. And it happens if you're black, you're 6 times more likely for that to happen. Look, I'm not saying that issue 3 resolves all these racial injustices, but you know what? When you take away that issue, and the one thing that people can look, you can smell pot coming out of someone's house or out of their vehicle or in their yard. And when you take that away, what you've actually seen in other states, Colorado being a prime example, is the arrest rates go down. And law enforcement can actually focus on other things. And you can take that $120 million a year that we waste and you can put it into needed and necessary things like heroin addiction and treatment.
That's a first for the City Club, a follow-up question. Nice job, sir. I did have a question about this, though. Doesn't the legislation doesn't it prohibit usage of marijuana in public places as well? I would think in a car, too.
It does.
So the point that you're making, if someone were to see someone smoking in a car, it would still be the same incentive to stop that car because that's illegal.
It would be, but here's the difference. So right now, it's the decriminalization, the cruel hoax that we play on our citizens, is it allows that person to be taken downtown and booked. Now, you may only get a misdemeanor out of that, but you're right. And under the amendment, we do not permit any public consumption. You cannot consume on a train. You cannot consume on a plane. You cannot consume in a car. I know that sounds like Dr. Seuss.
It does sound like Dr. Seuss.
But, there's a green eggs and ham thing in here. And I'm not sure what's in the green of the eggs, but you can imagine it could be infused. I don't know.
All right.
I'll take the position of really strongly disagreeing with his statistics and the outcomes. We know that...
I'm surprised, Bill.
We know that those arrests have significantly reduced here in Cuyahoga County. Right? And it may have not reduced for the rest of the state, but I know in Cuyahoga County we cut in half the number of arrests. And that's significant. And in Colorado, how do they have double the number of DUIs? That's significant.
Marijuana-related DUIs?
Yes, marijuana. That's the report. And the increase in expulsions from schools, and almost doubling the number of persons going to hospital on marijuana-related incidents. Those are significant, and those are of great concern.
Let's get another question in. If we want to circle back, we will have some time at the end for these guys to ask us or answer a summative question. One of our students. Hello there, young man.
Hello. I have a question. Okay, so I was reading this pamphlet, and it said that if it's legalized, there's going to be a bunch of like testing facilities all throughout Ohio. And is that just open for anybody? Like anyone could just go in there if you're 21 and start, smoking weed?
It's not that kind of testing. It's a great question. It's not that kind of testing, although I actually went to Ohio University. I grew up in Athens, and I would have thought the same thing.
By the way, the #1 party school in the nation, apparently.
Again, right? And so you can only imagine this is, you're like, is this why Ian's doing this? No. No, these are actually places where the marijuana is actually going to be tested for chemical compounds to make sure that what's being consumed is safe, what is being consumed is labeled, so that you know what is actually in the marijuana. Right now, people that consume marijuana have no idea what they're consuming. They don't know if there is mold. They don't know if there are pesticides. They don't know if there is,
I just heard
fecal
formaldehyde.
I'm sorry, I know you're all just eating, but fecal matter on this. So, this is an issue, and it's a health care issue. In Colorado, when they legalized personal use of marijuana, they said the personal use of marijuana has to be tested at labs, such as the one that will be here in Cuyahoga County, and they did not go back and deal with the medical marijuana, which you would assume, probably incorrectly, that should have been or would have been subject to testing.
Let me ask one piggyback to that question. The young man points out that there would be testing facilities. The law also points out that there would be a retail establishment per 10,000 residents. It would add up, after everything is up and running, somewhere around 1,100 to 1,200 retail establishments. But only 10 grow sites, and those 10 grow sites are already committed via the Constitution to the people who are backing this with their cash. That, I've heard from a number of people you would expect to support marijuana legalization, is the sticking point for them. What about that, and how do you answer people who say you're creating a monopoly, you're promising to 10 people, 10 investors or 10 groups of investors, and it doesn't sit well with them?
Sure, most of the states that have legalized marijuana actually start with a limited number of grows, and that's so the government can properly regulate this industry. You can imagine in Colorado, where they have hundreds and actually over 1,000 grows and operators, that it is impossible to regulate this properly. So under the amendment, it's paragraph 5, section F as in Frank, it actually says we start with 10 and the state can add more licenses to meet demand for medical marijuana patients and for the adult consumers. Plus, anybody 21 and older has the right to grow their own marijuana. That's arguably not a monopoly, but that is a regulated industry.
They can't sell it, but they can possess a certain amount that's more than they
That's right, and they can. And to your initial part of your question, there are 1,159 licenses that are provided. Bill's going to probably say that's more than Starbucks. That's actually more than not more than Starbucks and all the and McDonald's. Thank you. I knew there's another part.
I guess he was going to say that.
But it is more than Starbucks, but not more than all the coffee shops. And the other thing is, it may be more than, as Bill said, more than McDonald's. But folks, it's actually less than the number of Subway stores we have. And ultimately, you get to decide who's going to operate in your community. That's the beauty of the amendment. It actually follows the Ohio law on alcohol prohibition.
How about Wendy's and Arby's? You know what I mean?
I don't know. I don't have the stats on that.
Chick-fil-A?
I don't know. I certainly don't know about that.
Bill, your thoughts on the numbers, the 10 grow sites and the 1,100
monopoly is a
retailers.
monopoly. This is establishing a monopoly, period. And the other part is that it is controlling the number of sites that are out there and the process. They even put in there to control the taxes, which incidentally are lower than tobacco and alcohol and wine. So they put that in there, but it's lower. They control it, and they will continue to control it.
Of course, you can't tamp down the black market if your taxes are high, and you can't actually put them out of business by smothering them. That's one of the reasons to keep the taxes low. Let's
jump to the next question. Yes, sir.
Just a quick correction, Ian, and then my question. It's not the state that would add the grow sites. It's the 7-person commission that
That's
would
the
be
state.
established by the legislation. You said state, and that's very, very
Well, actually,
different.
it is the state, well, not to quibble with you, but that's a state marijuana control
I'm
commission.
quoting
appointed by
the
the
writing
governor.
in the 17
It's the
pages of
state.
constitutional amendment. You might want to check that.
It's a state
Here's
panel.
my,
It's a
state
here's my
panel,
question.
so, yeah.
You say that our elected officials have failed us. You've made that point a couple times, supposedly. Why should we believe that 10 or so very wealthy people in Ohio who stand to benefit greatly would have the interests of the common person in mind? It just seems not to be the right connection. We have the best system in terms of democratic government, not perfect, but you make it sound as though those 10 people have come forward to be the saviors of Ohio again when they benefit. So how do you respond to that?
Sure, no, I didn't say they were being saviors. I said actually they were doing what the legislature has failed to do. You're right, I'll say it a fourth time. The legislature has epically failed to do what a majority of Ohio voters want them to do, and that's to legalize marijuana for the adult personal consumption and for medicinal use. And ultimately, you know, you can say that maybe that the legislature will deal with this in the future. For 20 years now, they've failed to do so. A bill has been introduced every single General Assembly since 1997 and was introduced by my friend Bob Hagan from Youngstown. Every single year that bill would get one hearing, it would go to a committee, it would die. This year alone, now Bobby's gone from the legislature, this year alone we have House Bill 33. House Bill 33 deals with epileptic children. It had 9 co-sponsors. It's gotten one hearing to go to committee where it's going to die. But at the same time, we've had a House bill to make Hang On Sloopy the state's rock song. It's got 27 co-sponsors, 3 times the number of co-sponsors for that bill. It's sailed through the House. It's going into the Senate where it's going to be voted on. And I'm only pointing that out because we're showing more compassion for a rock song than we are for kids with epilepsy.
Okay, you've addressed the legislation side, but the other part of the gentleman's question was there are 10 specific moneyed investors who will benefit from this, and how would voters believe that they have the best interest of Ohio in mind?
Well, again, the amendment actually speaks to establishing a marijuana control commission that's appointed by the governor. It establishes a number of criteria that they have to meet. They have to meet the demand. There has to be a testing facility set up. There has to be manufacturing facilities. There has to be retail. I think the argument, arguably, to double that up, arguably is why these 10? Why is it these 10 are chosen? And the reality, again, is because the legislature has failed. Someone's got to pay for the campaign to get this passed, folks. If you think that this is that you're going to be able to get it through without anybody funding it, you're kidding yourselves. There have been other groups that have wonderful intents. They've been working with medical marijuana patients for years, not the least of which was the Ohio Rights Group. They got 150,000 signatures in a 3-year period. They were incapable of getting to the ballot. The folks that own those 10 facilities, yes, they will make money. So will all of the 3,000 employees who work in those facilities, and there'll be union jobs with union wages, and so will the thousands of Ohioans that will own the retail stores and the thousands of others that will work in those stores as well, in this legitimate taxed market.
Before we get to the next question, what kind of money are we talking about funding this campaign? More than 20 million?
This can be more than 20 million.
More than 30?
No.
Okay. Next
Unless you're
question.
contributing. How much are you contributing?
All right.
None, sir. I don't contribute to political campaigns.
Bill, you talked about federal research earlier. How do you respond to a National Cancer Institute study on Delta-9 THC, which is the main component of cannabis, on liver cells, where the cells actually showed damage or death as a result of using this Delta-9 THC on them?
Bill? This is one of our students, by the way, who knows way more than anybody on this
I
panel.
think he may know way more than me on that particular subject, and I'll talk to him I see one of our docs over here. If you don't mind sticking around, we'll talk to you after.
Talking about the damage, though, one of the studies, and there are many that talk about the damage. Bill talked about tar and damage that might happen to lungs. We talked about developing young brains. THC on the liver is another study that's being pointed out. So when you hear those types of things, Ian, there's a discussion about whether or not marijuana can be good for you and that this might actually impact health in a bad way.
Well, that's where Dr. Sanjay Gupta, the neurosurgeon and CNN contributor, actually has come around to being a proponent of medical marijuana. Has said that, I was opposed to this, but I realized that there is a medical need, and there is a medical application of this. It does work. It does help with people that have cancer in easing their suffering. It does help easing the anxiety of Alzheimer's patients. It does help with Parkinson's disease. It does help with sickle cell anemia. It does help certainly with Addison Benton and other epileptics who have gone for, as Addison did, at 4 years of age, going from 1,000 epileptic seizures a day to 2.
So I just finished a book written by Dr. Edwin Hill, who will say the opposite of what we just heard from Ian.
I'm shocked.
And I'm sure that the docs at the clinic and University Hospital will, and Metro and St. V's will agree with that. Every major medical institution has said very clearly that marijuana is dangerous and damaging to us in several different ways, a clinical way, social way, and other ways. So I would take that name and play him up against all other ones. I don't know if he's a medical organization, but I do know that the people I trust, that the people that I work with in this community have said, no, it's dangerous, stay away from it, and it's harmful, and it's hurting people.
I've got to ask a final summative question, but I want to squeeze in just one more from the audience before we do that. And if we can be brief on our answers here and then give yourselves some time to wrap up.
Well, good
Yes, sir.
afternoon. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. James and Mr. Denihan. I'm Anthony Price. I'm a senior at Shaw High School. In December of 2014, drugabuse.gov did a survey of top drugs used among 8th graders and 12th graders, and marijuana was one of the highest. In saying that, legalizing it or not, how do you think it will affect teens consuming marijuana?
How do you think legalization will affect it if it's already in that survey shown to be high? I would think alcohol rated pretty highly too.
I think the impact will be damaging, if that's the question he's asking.
It would mean more would use it in your opinion?
Well, we're finding out the perception of youth by what's happening in Colorado is that it could happen, that it's a perception that it's not damaging if it's legal.
Ian?
Well, it does going to be a shock, but I don't agree with Bill on this. And it's, again, the reality is if you talk to anybody that's trying to get alcohol, they'll find that's underage. You will find it's really tough to get alcohol. It is not tough to get marijuana today because drug dealers don't card kids to sell them marijuana. People at a convenience store do card people for alcohol. So you will actually see what they have seen in Colorado, and that's a reduction in teen use and teen ability to get marijuana.
All right, let's have a final thought here, and that is essentially, as we're listening to this conversation and asking these questions, who should we be thinking about would benefit the most from a yes or no vote, depending on your side? So in your case, the benefit from a no vote, and when I'm talking about a no vote, I'm talking about issue 3, which is legalization of marijuana. Who would benefit the most from a no vote?
I think our youth would benefit the most because they're carrying it on. Their perception that it's not harmful would become a reality. So I think that if we vote no, that our youth would benefit. Our hope that benefit will be see less deaths, less expulsions, and a greater understanding that it is harmful in the progression of individuals using drugs. We know that through this process, 17% of our youth become addicted. When they become adults, that goes down to 19%. So I think the group that I'm really concerned about is our youth. And we don't want them to get involved with gummy bears and having cocaine in it that is the potential from other areas that they use as candy. That's a reality. And the reality, if this passes in Ohio, that'll be a problem, a greater problem for us, I believe, with our youth.
Ian, James, your final thought on that? Who will benefit the most from a yes vote on issue 3, legalizing marijuana in Ohio?
I can tell you, well, I'll answer Bill's question first. The ones that actually benefit from a no are the drug dealers because they currently control the streets. There is no regulation on them. They don't want any regulation on them. Who would benefit the most is actually society, because you would stop wasting $120 million a year. You'd actually be able to fund heroin addiction and treatment services. You would actually have a system in place that protects people, and they would know what they're consuming. You would have regulation involved that would make sure that kids can't get marijuana, and only the folks that are the medical marijuana patients do have the ability to receive it. You're going to also be able to generate $554 million a year at stabilization. That's going to go, 85% of which will go back into our communities for safety services, for bridge and infrastructure repair. We're going to finally be able, folks, to fill potholes with pot money. And that's
How
something
long
that
do you
doesn't
sit and
happen.
think about these things?
I think about
these
this stuff all the
puns?
time. But I mean, ultimately, you know,
Somebody's going to take you up on that.
so, think about it all the time. I'm looking forward to it. Look, you know, the reality is you can continue to go down this path of failure and continue to pour money down a rat hole, or we can just be adults and say, look, folks are going to consume marijuana, and let's regulate it, let's test it, let's tax it, make sure that we have the money going back into our communities and stop this this ridiculousness.
Folks, first of all, I want to say thank you to you for excellent questions in the audience, and let's show our appreciation for our two panelists, Ian James and Bill Denihan. And thank you very much. That concludes our discussion today at the City Club. Thank you. Thanks for being here.
You're a force to be reckoned with.